The sky above Savannah lingered between decisions neither pouring nor clear, just suspended in a hesitant gray, like the air itself held its breath. Mist gathered gently on windshields and jacket shoulders. Puddles mirrored the neon glow of the grocery store sign, while faint rainbows shimmered on the surface of oil-slicked asphalt. Shoppers flowed through the lot, carts squeaking, doors slamming, wipers whining in slow unison, but no one noticed the boy standing barefoot beside the cart, corral still as a statue. He didn't beg, didn't move, just stood silently with mud-caked feet planted firmly on cold concrete. His hair hung in uneven locks, and his clothes were 2 sizes too large, but his eyes they held something ancient. 11 years old, but they watched the world like it owed him an answer. Tyrese Mallory wasn't lost. He was waiting. A sleek black Lincoln Navigator rolled into the closest spot, front row, like always. Charles Radnor stepped out with the certainty of a man who never had to ask permission. His polished shoes struck the wet pavement with a rhythm of entitlement. His charcoal suit clung to his form like success itself, and on his wrist was a watch that didn't tell time, it told status. The bag boy handed over the groceries too quickly. Charles didn't even glance at the kid. With a click of his key fob, the trunk popped open, and he spun toward the driver's seat like the world operated on his time. That's when he heard it soft but clear. Sir, ... I can make your mother walk again. He froze mid-step. No dramatic music, just a pause. Like the universe missed a beat. His expression didn't change at first. A small twitch in his brow. Then slowly he turned. The barefoot boy stood 10 feet away, unmoving. He didn't look away, didn't blink. Charles narrowed his eyes. What did you say? I can help her walk again. There was a flicker of something, annoyance maybe, or suspicion. The kind of look reserved for telemarketers or tabloid reporters. That's not funny, Charles snapped. And I don't appreciate strangers talking about my mother. I'm not joking, the boy said simply. I know she had a stroke 11 years ago. I know she can't raise her left arm. I know she cries when you're not home. The words hit Charles like static under the skin. His shoulders tightened. He scanned the parking lot. A few people were around, close enough to hear. One woman stood frozen halfway into her car, glancing nervously at the odd exchange. Who told you that? Charles barked, his voice dropping to a warning pitch. Who sent you? No one. I don't want anything. Just 5 minutes with her. That's all. Charles stared hard. The boy was too calm, too clean in his madness. It didn't feel like a scam, but that made it worse. This is some kind of stunt, he demanded. If I'm lying, Tyrese said, you'll know in 5 minutes. The wind shifted. The mist thickened. Charles exhaled slowly. You got a name, Tyrese. He hesitated. Then, almost against his own logic, muttered, Get in. The boy climbed into the back seat carefully, as if he were afraid to stain it with his presence. Charles started the car, jaw tight, and they drove. Neither spoke. Tyrese watched the trees pass. Charles watched him through the rearview mirror, like a riddle he hadn't solved. He didn't like questions he didn't ask. The streets changed. Brick gave way to iron. The fences grew taller. Moss-draped oaks leaned over cobbled paths as they reached the estate on Isle of Hope. The gate recognized Charles, buzzed him in. They rolled past a manicured garden and up the Crescent Drive. The house stood with quiet wealth too proud for welcome mats, too old for charm. You have 5 minutes, Charles said as he parked. If I don't like what I see, you're gone. I understand, Tyrese replied, but ... you'll want to stay. Charles said nothing. He led him through the side entrance, not the main one. Not for strangers. The hallway smelled like lemon polish and quiet rules. Dolores, the housekeeper, looked up from dusting. Her eyes darted from the boy to Charles, but she said nothing, just faded into the background like she'd been taught. She's in the sunroom, Charles muttered. Then he watched Tyrese take the lead as if he already knew. The way that unsettled him. The sunroom was drenched in soft light and the faint scent of lavender. Near the windows, in a floral upholstered chair, sat Helen Ratner. A blanket warmed her legs, her wheelchair idling nearby. Her silver hair was brushed back neatly. Her eyes were sharp, but distant, the kind of gaze that forgets today but remembers 1962. She looked up, saw her son, smiled. He stepped aside. He asked to see you. Helen's eyes landed on Tyrese. Confusion clouded her face. Do I know you? Not yet, he said gently. Hi, Miss Helen. Charles crossed his arms. Observed like a prosecutor. Tyrese pulled a small folded paper from his pocket, set it beside her on the side table. You drew this, he said. Back in '82, the oak tree in your yard on Ogeechee Road. Helen leaned forward, her fingers trembling. She picked up the sketch like it was glass. Her voice trembled. I haven't seen this in ... decades? Charles leaned in, alert. How do you have that? It was in the attic, Tyrese said, with the others, but you stopped drawing after the stroke. I thought maybe this would remind your hands what they used to know. Helen's eyes welled. You lived nearby? She asked. Double quotes. No, I don't have a home, but I know where yours used to be. Charles took a step forward, anger rising. Enough. Who are you really? What game is this? No one sent me, Tyrese said calmly. I dreamed about her 3 nights ago. Oh, for God's sake, Charles muttered. She couldn't move. She whispered your name. Helen let out a surprised breath. And you came. Tyrese nodded. I saw him, he added, turning to Charles. Outside her room, angry, blaming himself. Charles's jaw clenched. Stop. She asked you to visit that night. Her birthday. I said stop. You didn't come. Helen's hand reached out, found Charles's wrist. He flinched. I remember, she said softly. I waited. Up. I felt something closing inside me. I thought if I could just stay awake long enough, you'd walk through the door. Charles looked down, his lips pressed tightly. Tyrese stepped closer. But you made it through. Your body did. Your heart didn't. Helen touched the boy's cheek gently. Who are you? Tyrese smiled faintly. That doesn't matter. What matters is if you believe. You can heal. Charles turned and left without a word. The door clicked behind him. Inside, Helen's fingers began to move. Barely a tremble, a twitch, but it was there. Tyrese. Noticed she noticed? Neither said anything. Charles stood in the hallway, back to the wall, fists tight. He didn't like being unprepared. This boy, this barefoot stranger, had cracked open something he'd buried beneath work and guilt and years. Behind the door, he heard his mother talking. Clear, soft, alive. Dolores approached, wiping her hands. Everything all right, Mr. Ratner? He didn't answer, just stared at the floor. She's speaking, he whispered, like she used to. Dolores raised a brow as she passed Charles in the hallway. Then maybe, she murmured, don't stop whatever's happening in there. She didn't wait for a reply. She just turned and disappeared down the hall, leaving Charles standing. Alone, still struggling to decide whether to be terrified or grateful. Back in the sunroom, Helen's hands rested in her lap. Her right one was calm. Her left, useless for more than a decade now, trembled faintly, like a memory trying to become a movement. Tyrese sat cross-legged on the rug in front of her, as still as ever. But something in his posture had shifted, more open, less waiting. Like whatever he had come to give was finally being received. You always kept your drawings, he said softly. Not as a question, but as a statement. Even when you stopped making new ones. Helen gave a sad little smile, one that curled at the edges like an old letter pulled from a drawer. They felt like proof, she said, that I used to be more than what this body became. You still are, Tyrese replied, with the kind of quiet certainty that didn't try to convince, but you stopped believing it. Helen studied him for a long moment. Her gaze was sharper than her voice, tired but knowing. You talk like someone older. Maybe I am, he said, and smiled not playfully, but knowingly. And she, unbelievably, chuckled. A sound that hadn't lived in that room in years. Even the furniture seemed to lean toward it, craving the warmth. Tyrese leaned forward slightly. Can I touch your hand? She hesitated, not out of fear but out of unfamiliarity. Then she nodded, unsure why she trusted this boy. He reached gently, wrapping her trembling hand in both of his palms, were warm not unusually, but meaningfully. They felt like the earth, like something that stayed when everything else blew away. Close your eyes, he said. She did. Picture the tree, he whispered, the one you used to draw, in the backyard. Not just what it looked like. Remember how it felt. The bark, the rough edges under your fingers, the way the light filtered through the branches in early fall, the way the roots felt under your bare feet. Helen's lips parted slightly. Her chest rose. I can see it, she whispered. Now what did it feel like to stand there? Her breath caught. A tear welled, slowly tracing her cheek. Free, she said, her voice shaking. Say it again. Free. In the hallway. Charles had cracked the door just a little. Enough to see the two of them. Enough to feel the shift in the room's temperature. Enough to hear his mother say a word she hadn't used in 11 years. Helen was crying, but it wasn't sadness. It was something deeper. Some long-buried ache that was finally exhaling. Grief? Memory? Grace? Maybe all three. Tyrese placed her hand gently back in her lap. You don't have to stay in that chair, he whispered. Not forever. But first you have to remember what it felt like to be alive. Not just breathing. Alive. Helen opened her eyes and stared at her hands. Her left hand twitched again. This time, more clearly, a little stronger. Her eyes widened. I felt that, she whispered. I know, Tyrese said. She looked up at him. How? I didn't give you anything, he said. I just reminded you of what you already had. It was never gone, just waiting. Charles pushed the door open. The room turned quiet. He stepped in slowly, his voice lower, now less certain. What do you want from us? Tyrese looked up. Nothing. No money. No attention. The boy smiled softly. No one listens to barefoot kids who sleep under porches? Charles narrowed his eyes. Then why? Why help her? Teresa's voice was steady, because she forgot who she was, and so did you. Someone had to remember. Helen's fingers twitched again. This time, Charles noticed. But what was shifting wasn't just in her. It was in him too, though he wouldn't admit it yet. Not out loud. That night, Charles didn't sleep. He sat in his study, lights off, a half-filled glass of bourbon warming, beside his untouched laptop. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. Inside, he stared at the shadows on the ceiling. The boy's words had burrowed in his chest like a splinter. He couldn't shake them. And her hand, that movement. He remembered the diagnosis. He remembered the appointments, the folders, the specialists from Miami, Dallas, Boston. Every single one had said the same thing. No recovery expected. Irreversible. Damich's mother would never regain use of that side. She'd never walk again. Never draw again. He paid for ramps, nurses, speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy. He did everything money could do, except show up. That night, the guilt hung heavy like a chain around his ribs. He remembered her voice on the phone, the day before the stroke. "Come home if you can, darling. We'll make peach cobbler like we used to." She had sounded light, hopeful. He had said he'd try, but the meeting in Tampa had been important. Investors don't wait. He convinced himself she'd understand. Then, around midnight the call came, Dolores crying. His mother had collapsed. They found her face down in the hallway. She'd tried to walk. She had waited for him, and he never showed. The next morning, her speech was slurred. Her eyes were dimmed. She didn't even remember calling. Charles never spoke of it, but it lived in him. A quiet regret carved into the walls of his heart. He stood up and walked quietly to her room. She was asleep now, but her hand, her left hand, rested outside the blanket. It was twitching, not in spasms, in movement, real movement. He turned away, something breaking open inside him that he didn't have a name for. The next morning, he found Tyrese sitting on the back porch, legs swinging, talking to one of the cats like it was an old friend. "You slept here?" Charles asked. Tyrese nodded. "Didn't want to leave yet." Charles stepped outside, the wood creaking beneath his feet. The morning was hot and heavy, typical for Savannah, but it felt different. "You want to tell me how you know all this about my mother?" "I already did. Dreams don't explain how you had her sketched. Some dreams don't come from sleep." Charles exhaled. "You always talk like that." Tyrese gave a half smile. "I just say things the way I hear them." There was a pause. Then Charles asked something he hadn't planned. "What about me? Did you dream about me too?" Tyrese's smile faded. He looked at Charles not like a child, but like someone who had seen too much. "Yeah," he said. "You were standing in a room full of light, but you couldn't feel any of it, like it was shining for everyone but you." Charles didn't speak. "You know how to see pain in other people," Tyrese continued, "but you won't look at your own." Charles cleared his throat. "You ever think of becoming a therapist?" Tyrese chuckled. "I don't think I'd pass the dress code." Charles smiled, almost despite himself, then asked gently, "You ever know your own mother?" Tyrese was quiet. "Not really. I remember her voice, but not her face. People stopped seeing me a long time ago. I got good at watching. They sat together like that, not quite friends, not quite strangers, somewhere in between." But Charles didn't know yet Tyrese hadn't just come for Helen. He had come for him too, that afternoon. Helen sat upright in her bed without help, a movement she hadn't made in years. The nurse double-checked her vitals. "Pulse is stronger," she said, frowning, "and her breathing's more even." Dolores kept stealing glances like she didn't trust her own eyes. Charles stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, watching everything. Tyrese stood near the window, light framed his outline. Charles broke the silence. "What did you do to her?" Tyrese turned. "Nothing," she remembered. "That's not a medical explanation. She's not just a medical case." Dolores looked back. "Whatever it is, it's working." Charles shook his head. "Working doesn't mean real. The brain plays tricks. Something about this doesn't add up." "If you're scared," Tyrese said softly, "just say it." Charles bristled. "I don't get scared." "Then what are you doing here, instead of in your downtown office?" That landed harder than it should have. But Charles said nothing. Helen raised her hand weakly. "Boys," she said, "please." They quieted. Charles moved closer. "Art, you sure you're okay?" "I feel like I've woken up," she said. "He's doing something. I don't know what, but it's real." Charles looked to Tyrese. "What exactly do you want to try now?" Tyrese stepped forward. "I want her to remember something else, but she has to trust me." Helen nodded. "I do." He knelt again. "Close your eyes, Miss Helen. Picture yourself at the kitchen sink, in your old house. Do you remember?" She smiled. "Of course I do." Tyrese leaned against the brick wall of the train station, hands in his pockets, his breath rising in shallow clouds. The city moved around him, indifferent, fast, and full of voices that never said his name. His duffel bag was old, torn at the edges like his patience, but it carried the weight of a decision years in the making. He had left this place at 19, angry and invisible. Now he was back, 34, and scarred, not just from combat, but from the silence that met his every return. Nobody was there to greet him. No signs, no embraces, just the screech of the subway door behind him and the sound of a world that had long since moved on. He started walking, not toward anyone, just forward. The streets were familiar in that cruel way. Memories are showing him glimpses of the past at every turn. The barber shop where he used to sweep floors, the liquor store his uncle used to sit outside of, the alley where Malik got jumped in '07, all still there. Just aged, just colder. He passed two teenagers with hoodies pulled over their heads, laughter bubbling as they played fight near a corner store. Tyrese paused. For half a second, he saw himself and James before the war. Before the nights they both stopped sleeping, before James stopped waking up altogether. Tyrese's fingers clenched around the strap of his bag. The weight of loss never announces itself. It just waits. And then, without warning, it breathes down your neck on a random Tuesday afternoon. He reached the old neighborhood. The houses were tighter now, not physically, but emotionally. There was no welcome in the way people peeked through blinds. No warmth in the way kids played, cautious, unsure. He knocked on his aunt's door. She opened it with hesitation, squinting like she was trying to recognize the boy she once knew in the man who stood on her porch. "Ty," he nodded, unsure if he should smile or apologize. She stepped aside and let him in. Inside, it smelled of old cooking oil and lavender. The furniture hadn't changed. The same plastic-covered couch, the same doilies on the armrests. He sat down like a stranger in a museum. "Army?" she asked. "Navy," he corrected, his voice quiet. She nodded, then poured him some tea that had clearly been sitting all day. No one talked about his mother. No one asked about the medals. And no one mentioned James. That was the way this family healed, by pretending the wounds were birthmarks. At night, Tyrese laid on the pull-out bed and stared at the ceiling. It was cracked in the same places as when he was a kid. Only now he knew why ceilings cracked. Pressure, time, neglect. Next day, he walked to the community center. It was smaller now, underfunded and quieter than he remembered. Ms. Lat, who used to run the youth basketball program, was still there, older, slower, but still wearing those big hoop earrings and speaking with a voice that made kids straighten up. "Boy, what the hell are you doing here?" "I'm back," he said simply. "For how long?" He hesitated. "For good." She narrowed her eyes, then pulled him into a hug that smelled like cocoa butter and cigarette smoke. "About damn time." He started helping out, fixing shelves, cleaning up broken chairs, showing the kids how to wrap their fists before boxing. But the city didn't change just because he came home. It resisted. It tested him. One afternoon, a white woman clutched her purse tighter as he walked past her near the bus stop. Another day, 2 police cruisers slowed down as he crossed the street, their stares sharp enough to draw blood, but he never broke, because Tyrese wasn't there to fight. He was there to be seen, to remind the block that boys like him don't disappear. They return. One evening, while coaching a group of middle schoolers on the court, a kid named Darnell asked, "Coach T, why you walk like something heavy's on your back?" Tyrese smiled, "Because something is, but I carry it so you don't have to." And that was the first time in a long time he said something that felt like truth. Tyrese hadn't stepped foot in that town for over 12 years, but the air still smelled like cut grass and regret, like summers that overstayed their welcome and winters that never left soon enough. The road leading in hadn't changed. The same crooked sign with the town's name peeling off letter by letter, like even the wood was trying to forget where it came from. The tires of the rental car kicked up dry dirt as he pulled to the side of the road across from the field where he used to run laps barefoot when his cleats gave out. He sat there for a long time before getting out. Not because he was unsure, he'd made up his mind weeks ago, but because facing the past isn't about decision. It's about endurance. It's about knowing the weight of your father's silence, your mother's prayers, and every stare you had to swallow like poison just to keep your job, your record, your place in line. Tyrese looked older than he was, not in the face, which still held the sharpness of someone who used to fight, but in the way his shoulders curved like they'd been carrying unsaid things for too long. He walked past the mailbox with the bent flag, up the porch with 3 creaking steps, and stared at the front door. Paint chipped, screen ripped. That old doorbell he used to press when he forgot his key, still broken. He didn't knock. The house was empty now. But it wasn't silence that greeted him when he stepped inside. It was memory. The kind that floats in the walls and sits on the furniture like dust no one dares clean. The couch still leaned to one side where his father used to slump after shifts at the plant. The corner of the kitchen counter still bore the dent from when he was 12 and slammed his elbow during a fight with his older brother. That brother was gone now, lost to a system that saw potential and labeled it threat. Tyrese was the one who left, the smart one, the one who made it. Except making it had a cost. You don't walk into white boardrooms with your back straight and skin brown without paying for every syllable you speak, and every breath you don't. You don't correct someone for calling you Tyrone without being labeled aggressive. You don't get promoted without wondering if it's a checkbox move. And you never ever lose your cool, no matter how badly you want to scream. That was the rule. Be excellent. Be twice as good. Be invisible and unforgettable at the same time. Back in the hallway, Tyrese reached for the old photo frame still clinging to the wall by a single rusted nail. Inside, a faded picture of his mother holding him on her lap. She had the kind of strength that didn't need volume. She could silence a room with a look, mend wounds with a word. She died the way most strong women do, too early, too tired, and too proud to ask for help. Tyrese never forgave himself for not being there the night she passed. He told himself he was working, told himself he had deadlines, but in truth, he was afraid to come back and see how far she'd fallen while he was out proving he wasn't like the rest. Except he was just a black man trying to breathe without permission. Outside, the town hadn't noticed he'd arrived. No banners, no whispers, but the old folks still watched from their porches with that same suspicious squint. The one that asked what you're doing back here without saying a word? At the gas station, the clerk paused when he walked in, then relaxed when he recognized the last name on the ID. You one of Rosa May's boys? Tyrese nodded. The man softened. She used to come in here every Tuesday for scratch-offs and a Pepsi. Sat right there on that bench. Talking about her boys in the city, Tyrese smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Back home, he sat on the edge of the porch, watching the sun paint the street gold. A group of kids rode by on bikes, one of them giving him a nod, the kind you give a stranger who looks familiar. Maybe they saw something in his face. Maybe they saw themselves, 20 years from now. He hoped not. He hoped they'd be freer. Inside the house, he took down the box from the top shelf in the bedroom closet. Inside letters never mailed, notes from his mother, and one old cassette tape labeled for Ty. He didn't have a cassette player, didn't need one. He could hear her voice anyway, soft, firm, full of warnings and hope. Don't let them make you small, she'd always say. Don't you ever shrink to fit their fear. He lit a candle on the kitchen counter and sat in the dark. No phone, no TV, just the hum of memory. That night, he walked through town, past the high school where they searched his locker, past the diner where they made him wait for service, past the station where they once held him overnight because someone said he fit the description. Every building was the same, only he had changed, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Because sometimes returning isn't about reconciliation. It's about reclaiming, about walking through the same door and knowing you're not the same person who left. And so Tyrese stood beneath the streetlight where he got his first kiss, where he got shoved against a cop car, where he promised himself he'd never come back. He stood there not as the boy who left, but as the man who survived. And survival, he realized, is its own kind of victory, quiet, heavy, but earned.